The $1 trillion lie, why Tokyo is slowly sinking and Japan is letting it happen. It's payday and the flood alert pings before your train hits Kiba. You open the map again and wonder if tonight's typhoon nudges next month's mortgage rate. Your insurer just added a storm surge rider, whatever that means, and your property estimate shrank after the last king tide. Transit fares edge higher, your ward tax creeps up, and the city promises stronger defenses. Here, is what the brochure skips. Parts of Tokyo are still effectively below the tide. If your savings live here, pension funds, equity, rent, this isn't abstract. It's your balance sheet breathing with the moon, while someone else decides how high the next wave climbs. Some neighborhoods are being quietly managed, not fully saved, to protect others. The public line is resilience for all. The internal logic is triage, reinforce where GDP per hectare and network criticality run highest, and assure functionality elsewhere. There's a document, criteria, a year stamp, committee minutes that locked it in. We'll name it, show the tiered map that decides who gets crown raises and who gets pumps and patience. One sentence in that memo turns flood defense into asset allocation. In 90 seconds, you'll hear who wrote it and when. First, why this matters now, because once the bonds price in, the map sets premiums, loan terms, and your street's future. Risk is stacking this decade. Global sea level is accelerating, while legacy subsidence keeps the eastern wards low. According to Tokyo's own updates, roughly 20% of the 23 wards, about 124 square kilometers, sit below high tide, sheltering around 1.5 million people. The defenses are real: 15 floodgates, continuous seawalls 5 to 8 meters above low tide, and pump stations that can throw about 12 tons per second per large unit. But steel ages, budgets tighten, and Japan's fiscal squeeze, driven by rising social security costs and heavy debt, forces hard choices. To understand the memo, we need the ground truth. Tokyo didn't just sink. Decades of groundwater extraction pulled it down, and you can't unsink clay. We move fast and straight. Peak moment, rewind, complications, crisis, and meaning. What happened, who made it happen, why it seemed rational, and how it's pricing families out. One clause, one contour, one premium at a time. We'll braid 3 threads: a delta city on soft alluvium, an arsenal of gates and pumps that can hold a bay, and a budget that can't hold everything. First, the ground. Edo rose on wetlands, canals, and fill. In the late 19th century, through the post-war boom, industry pumped groundwater and the land slumped, meters in places near the bayfront. Restrictions in the 196s and 197s slowed subsidence, but the bowls remained. Then came hardware, tidal barriers, inner levees, and drainage pumps, remote operated from dual storm surge centers in Tatsumi and Konan, with seawall heights set against Icewind-class surges and IPCC sea level guidance, reviewed every 10 years. It works, until money collides with maintenance cycles. Japan's aging curve is driving pension and medical costs higher, and analyses warn household savings could turn negative by around 203, tightening financing. That's where a prioritization tool enters, weighting hazard, exposure, and socioeconomic consequence. Once that tiered map exists, neighborhoods live by it. Meanwhile, insurers and lenders read the same tiers and adjust. Basis points here, riders there. Gravity becomes a line item. The sinking ground, subsidence, and the delta. To understand why parts of Tokyo sit below the tide, start with mud. Edo grew on a flat, wet plain where the Sumida slowed, dropped its silt, and fanned into creeks and marsh. Shoguns cut canals through soft alluvium and stacked neighborhoods on layers of fill. The ground wasn't bedrock. It was a sponge, fine clays and peats that compress when you load them and collapse when you drain their water. By the late 19th century, industry wanted that water. Breweries, dye works, shipyards, and power plants drilled wells into deep aquifers. Pumps ran, groundwater fell, and the sponge shrank. In the eastern wards, Koto, Edogawa, parts of Sumida, the drop wasn't folklore. It was measured in meters. Floors tilted, bridges bent toward canals, and high tide crept closer to front doors. After the war, the boom pressed harder. More factories, more wells, and under the bay, natural gas extraction pulling on the same system. Gauges near the docks logged subsidence over the 20th century on a scale you feel in your knees. Coastal engineers later put a hard number to the maximum drop. as much as 4.4 meters across parts of Tokyo. Once clays rearrange, they don't spring back. That elevation is gone. The city fought back. In the 196s and 197s, regulations throttled groundwater pumping. New supplies came from upstream reservoirs and rivers. The sinking slowed. But go stand in a 0-meter block and check the storm drain grate. You'll find it below the canal's high water line. Tokyo's own figures say roughly 20% of the 23 wards, about 124 square kilometers, now sit at or below sea level at high tide, home to around 1.5 million people. That's not a forecast, that's a base condition. Meanwhile, sea level started its own steady climb. A few millimeters a year globally sounds small until you add it to districts already pushed down. Storm surges ride on that mean, and wind setup piles the bay into corners. You need less storm to get the same flood. Physics stacks risk on people who already live low. Make it human. In Edogawa, a grandfather noticed tea pooling toward the street. He kept a marble on the tatami to check the tilt. Over years, the marble rolled faster. Cracks by the jenkin got patched twice. On a king tide after a typhoon brushed the bay, a daughter marked the high line on the kitchen doorframe. It reached her shoulder. She started checking tide tables the way other kids checked movie times. Across town, engineers mapped it like a medical chart. They overlaid old well fields with settlement contours and traced shallow basins, legacy bowls where water prefers to go. The map wasn't just topography, it was memory. Every basin meant a neighborhood needing help forever. Gates to keep the bay out, pumps when those gates close, and streets that drain uphill to a canal. Here's the twist you feel on calm days. The canals that made Edo wealthy now act like veins and trapdoors. When floodgates swing shut against a surge, rainwater inside the bowl has nowhere to go. That's why pump stations, Tatsumi, Sunamachi, Hamarikyu, Shibora exist. Pipes taller than a person grab brown water and throw it over the wall. A single large unit moves roughly 12 tons a second. Run a bank, and you empty pools in heartbeats. It's loud, ugly, life-saving, and utterly dependent on power, maintenance, and timing. Tokyo learned under names that still show up in files. Kitty in 1949, Vera in 1959, Hagibis decades later. Each event whispered something into the logs, where water rose fastest, which pumps flirted with max, which underpasses turned into tanks. The more those whispers accumulated, the clearer the lesson. Subsidence is a one-way ticket, adaptation is a subscription. Households adapted first. Landlords asked about flood histories. Tenants studied evacuation maps, noticed shelters sat outside the ward. A small factory in Kasai priced a new lathe versus moving 2 stations inland. The move won, not from fear, but because a week of downtime would kill payroll. Risk turned into commute time and rent. Then money started translating gravity. Insurers didn't need a lecture to add riders based on elevation and claims. Lenders added basis points for addresses inside bowls. Appraisers gave similar streets different values if one sat a step higher. None of it was personal. It was water turned into pricing. Meanwhile, the ground kept telling the same story. Clays that compress, fills that settle, water that finds the lowest line drawn by a century of choices. You can regulate wells and slow the drop. You can build walls and buy time, but you can't ask clay to rise. That simple constraint sets the stage for everything that follows, hardware built to hold a line, and budgets deciding where that line stands taller. A final micro moment. A ward officer visits a 3-generation house to explain a grant for removable flood boards. The grandfather runs a finger along a thin crack he's patched twice. The daughter asks if the city will raise the street too. The officer explains the sequence and the next review cycle. The grandson rolls a marble toward the door. It picks up speed. And that's the story in one line. A city that sank by inches, now living by minutes, waiting on centimeters. The arsenal of defenses, gates, levees, pumps. Start where steel meets tide. 15 floodgates guard the canals feeding in Tokyo, open on ordinary days so ships pass and rivers breathe. In a low-pressure line with onshore wind, operators at Tatsumi watch gauges and cameras stitch a live map. The order to close moves faster than the wind. Gate by gate, the bay is kept out and the city turns into a managed bowl. That's deliberate. The walls aren't guesses. Along the tidal barrier, seawalls rise roughly 5 to 8 meters above low tide, heights calibrated to Icewing-class surges with wave run-up, and set against sea level guidance drawn from the IPCC. Behind that outer line, inner levees run like a second spine, some disguised as park berms, others capped by promenades. People jog on top of reinforced earth that doubles as a roof over a simple promise: the water stops here. Then comes the cost of that promise. Close the gates and inland rain has nowhere to go, so the pumps take over. In Tatsumi, Sunamachi, Hamarikyu and Shibora, pipes wide enough to stand inside grab brown canal water and throw it seaward. A single big unit moves about 12 tons per second. A bank of them turns minutes into margin. The sound is all throat and thunder, motors, bearings, blades, because time is the currency when levels climb. Meanwhile, something else ties the system together. Since 2015, a second control center in Konan mirrors Tatsumi's screens. If one goes dark, the other takes command. Operators drill failures, remote closes that don't take, manual cranks in cold rain, relay swaps when alarms blink hot. Redundancy isn't rhetoric. It's staff who know how long it takes to cross a catwalk in sideways wind. Maintenance lives where salt works slowly. Gates sit in brine, hinges pit, seals dry, crews grease, cycle and replace on 5- and 10-year clocks, because missing a bearing today becomes a surge day headline later. Concrete spalls, crowns need centimeters added as sea level projections ratchet. You don't raise kilometers at once, you buy meters, literally, in budget lines that compete with clinics and schools. Walk Harumi on a calm afternoon and you'll see how the city sells this. A levee wears a park skin. Steps shape a waterfront view that's also armor, with a crest disguised as a terrace edge. It's urban renaissance in the brochure, it's revetment and freeboard in the drawings. The waterfront invites strollers to forget what the steel beneath must remember. Now test days. A typhoon skims the bay, pressure drops, wind stacks water against the barrier. Center screens show a tide line creeping toward design bands. Gates shut. Pumps spool in sequence, not all at once, to avoid sloshback that would crest a low key. An operator keeps one basin just under a known troublesome crown while bleeding another faster because a hospital's switchgear sits a block back. These choices are 30-second ethics. Which staircase stays dry, which loading dock floods and reopens by Tuesday. Upstream, straightened rivers shoulder their role. Floodways and detention tunnels, out of sight on blue sky days, swallow peaks and release late, after gates reopen. Under a manhole in a quiet street, a volume big enough to park planes fills, buys an hour, then exhales into a canal once the sea stops pushing. The system's success breeds its own fragility. Dry floors dull urgency. Each storm that ends in boredom makes it harder to argue for the next overhaul kit kept on a shelf, the next generator load test, the next crown raise measured in unglamorous centimeters. Yet the maintenance ledger doesn't care about sentiment. Bearings still need dates. Seals still crack. Steel still rusts to a schedule. Power is the other hinge. Pumps are just promises without electricity. Substations serving them sit higher than they once did. Feeds are looped so a single failure doesn't cascade. Generators stand ready, fueled and tested, because an earthquake could ask the same system to perform when the grid itself is breathless. Operators rehearse the awful, hand closing a gate when the screen goes black and the wind lifts tools off a deck. Here's the catch that defines the decade. You can make gates smarter, variable speed drives, AI water level forecasts to feather flow, more sensors in paler segments, but code doesn't add crest height. It buys minutes. Minutes matter until the envelope arrives. The storm that stacks low pressure, wind setup, inland rain, and a clogged culvert in the wrong underpass. On that night, the only numbers that count are meters of crown, megawatts for motors, and crews who remember which bolt fights back. So yes, Tokyo built an arsenal that turns weather into management most days. It keeps ports moving, trains on time, basements dry. But every part has a clock, and every clock costs. The line will hold where discipline, steel, and money keep it tall. Elsewhere, the pumps, drills, and flood boards do what they can. That's the quiet contract under every sunny promenade on the bay. The budget squeeze, demographics, and debt. While Gates faced wind and tide, another current built in spreadsheets. Japan was aging into a math problem. Pensions, medical care, and long-term care kept climbing every year, taking a bigger share of public spending. Debt sat high by global standards, and even with low rates, servicing it crowded rooms where big public works once breathed. Flood defense didn't vanish. It started competing with hips, hearts, and home nurses. Stakes first. If the budget bends away from concrete, what gets risked isn't just a skyline. It's the dialysis clinic near a canal that needs reliable power. It's a logistics hub where a day offline empties grocery shelves. It's families whose premiums creep because a levy crown moves 2 fiscal years to the right. The question turns brutal. Where do yen buy the most stability per person, per hour, per meter? Action started with a tone shift in meeting notes. Expansion became replacement. The verbs changed. Maintain, extend, prioritize. Engineers brought lists. Bearings due in 5, seals in 10, crown raises required to keep up with IPCC-linked sea level increments. Finance brought charts that never blinked, aging curves, social security outlays, and a line showing household savings trending down toward negative in the early 203s. Borrowing stayed cheap, but warnings grew louder. When domestic savings thin, the cost of long bonds can move. Inside the Tokyo metropolitan government, a practical doctrine took shape. Protect the dense belts first, the CBD, the Bayfront logistics spine, major transit interchanges, because their failure cascades. The rest gets assurance of functionality, inspections, drills, mobile pumps, and targeted patching. It wasn't cruelty. It was arithmetic under constraint. Yet arithmetic creates borders. On one side, meters of new crown. On the other, minutes of margin. Meanwhile, supplementary budgets, the old relief valve, were told to stay shut unless disaster struck. That left capital plans to move in long, locked trains. Bonds were issued with schedules engraved into future calendars, pump overhauls in year 3, crest lifts in year 5, redundancy kits procured now and warehoused. If your street sat 2 stations east of a dark-shaded corridor, the schedule felt like fate. Here's where numbers met neighborhoods. A deputy director stepped out of a pension briefing, projected medical spending up 60+% by 204, and into a flood session where a single pump kit cost a headline figure in millions. His pen hovered over a line that said, "Extend interval by 12 months." He knew bearings fail in storms, not on spreadsheets. He also knew clinics count votes. He signed the extension and promised sensors instead. Data is cheaper than steel, up front. Insurers were listening too. Public commitments to specific segments, funded crown raises, redundant power became signals, premiums held in those belts. In assurance zones, deductibles grew teeth. Mortgage desks mirrored the move, adding quiet basis points to pale bands on internal maps. Appraisals learned a new line, distance to upgraded barrier. The budget's triage rippled into monthly payments. Impact rolled back to the tax base. Where premiums rose and loans tightened, small businesses took second locations uphill, then shifted payrolls there. Ground floors switched to storage. Residential listings pushed top-floor units. Ward revenues flattened exactly where maintenance costs ran high. Finance asked for value retention metrics before moving a segment from assurance to reinforcement, but value retention sagged because reinforcement waited. The loop was tidy and cruel. A micro-scene makes it plain. In Minami-Sunamachi, a hardware shop owner reads a letter about a subsidy for flood boards. He asks the ward when the levy crown 2 blocks over will be raised. The answer is a date tied to a 10-year review, not this cycle. He buys the boards and calls a broker about a small space near a Tier 1 corridor. His son starts stocking that store on weekends. Back in committee, engineers argued for discipline you can't photograph, overhaul kits on shelves, generator load tests, manual drill cycles in rain. Finance nodded and asked for cost-effectiveness proofs. Yenper avoided systemic loss. The phrase hardened into policy. Protect where failure breaks networks. Manage where failure inconveniences and recovers. Every budget season reinforced the line. National headwinds kept blowing. Analyses warned the household savings rate could turn negative by around 203, pushing the state toward more external funding and higher borrowing costs. That didn't close floodgates. It narrowed aisles. Seawall crowns still rose along priority runs, pump kits still arrived for high-load stations, and sensors flowered in deferred zones. But the system's shape, tall belts, careful margins, set like concrete. Here's the hinge: calm seasons reward caution. Dry floors validate deferrals. Each quiet autumn makes it easier to stretch intervals, to praise smart monitoring, to accept assurance as enough. Then a compound storm arrives and bills come due at once. Repairs, generator upgrades, an accelerated crown. Money appears because crisis writes headlines. It arrives late because bonds take time. Demographics don't wait. Steel doesn't either. The squeeze isn't a villain. It's a ledger deciding geography. And once ledgers learn a map, markets memorize it. Alternatives: what choosing to save more would take. If the city chose the harder road, saving more streets, not just the belts, it would start with height everywhere it matters. Not a moonshot wall, but a continuous, unfashionable lift across the low runs, Kasai to Kamedo, Komatsugawa to the Sumida mouth. Engineers would mark a single line and specify crowns that factor surge, wave run-up, and IPCC sea level increments reviewed every 10 years. That's centimeters of concrete laid like rent, steady, boring, non-negotiable. Stakes are households and hours. The payoff of full defense isn't a photo. It's a Tuesday where pumps don't scream and a daycare doesn't cancel. To get there, action means threading pumps into every bowl behind closed gates. Not 4 giants, but a constellation, medium units at choke points, with looped feeders and substations dry by design. Generators tested under load, not just on sunny days. Diesel logistics mapped to quake routes. Batteries staged where a truck can actually reach in weather. Then elevate where gravity still wins. Subsided basins stay basins, so you raise the ground people stand on. Microdikes on backstreets, curbs and sidewalks lifted by a step, door thresholds funded to match the new crest. Amphibious streets become ordinary, curbs double as channels, planted strips soak and hold, inlets sized for the rain that falls now, not in 198. Lot by lot is too slow, clusters are the unit. Pick 3x3 blocks and lift them as one. Utilities, sills, crossings, vaults. Soft edges matter too. Canal armor doesn't have to look like a bunker. Terraced banks and vegetated revetments eat wave energy, so crown adds can be centimeters, not half meters. Plazas over culverts become detention decks, playgrounds on calm days, quiet basins in storms. It's Dutch logic, Tokyo speed. Human tools have to match the hardware. Voluntary buyouts can't be a flyer. They need packages with dignity, market value, moving costs, rent bridges, counseling and school transfers that keep classes together. Land swaps beat cash alone, a key in a redeveloped ridge project with clinic chains families already use. For those who stay, grants must hit thresholds, boilers and panels, backed by inspections that solve, not punish. Money decides if this lives on paper or on blocks. Green and resilience bonds tied to measurable outputs, centimeters of crown raised, pump hours added, street lift meters completed, pull pension funds that want climate-safe returns. Catastrophe bonds backstop tails if a surge breaches design. Premiums are cheaper than rebuilding a ward. National guarantees lower borrowing costs because ports, data halls, and HQ towers behind this work are national assets. Earmarked utility surcharges, pennies per bill, walled by law for pump kits and seal cycles, keep maintenance from becoming theater. Governance needs clarity, not glow. Publish risk ranges by basin, the 1 in 50, 1 in 100, revised 1 in 200, alongside choices people can vote on. Reinforce here, elevate here, or buy out here with trade-offs shown. Consent-based triage is slower than a memo and stronger than a slogan. Lock maintenance discipline into statute, spares on shelves, tests under load, drill cadence, so stretched intervals aren't a budget tactic. Micro-story, 6 blocks in Koto form a cooperative. They pick cluster lift, win a bond slot, and spend 2 summers with surveyors. Curbs rise 25 centimeters, thresholds come up on city grants, vaults move into a shared kiosk perched on the new crest. The sweets shop that was leaving stays, insurance knocks the premium down for measured elevation and proximity to a lifted corridor. Kids run on a playground that doubles as detention. A manhole that used to rattle first goes quiet. About code, make equipment elevation mandatory in designated basins. Require floodboards on new ground floor shops, but pair the rule with grants and training. Set drive-by-design standards for critical corridors, hospitals, transit nodes, power loops. Reward compliance with premium cuts negotiated with insurers and loan rate bumps agreed with banks. Tie zoning bonuses to street lift participation. Denser floor area for developers who fund the blocks that carry their foot traffic. Will it save every cul-de-sac? No. Even the Netherlands mixes hold and room for water. But choosing to save more turns patchwork into pattern, continuous crowns, redundant pumps, elevated clusters, and social tools that move people together when staying is unwise. It's costlier upfront and cheaper over decades if you count downtime honestly. Why hasn't it happened? Politics likes ribbon cuttings, this work prints receipts. Procurement is slow, 4 bureaus must share turf. Debt service and social security squeeze headroom. Every yen must beat pensions on paper. Calm seasons dull urgency. Near misses validate waiting. That's the trap. Here's the counter. Define wins people can feel. Dry Tuesdays in pale zones. Real premium discounts after measured lifts. A shelter map that shortens, not lengthens. Post the before and after crown, the pump margin gained, the deductible shaved. Then do it again, block after block, until the map's pale turns mid-tone, and mid-tone turns dark where lives actually happen. The real constraints: politics, culture, time. This isn't just engineering, it's arithmetic with voters. Ballots cluster uphill, older homeowners with high turnout and long memories. Waterfront wards skew younger, more transient, more renter-heavy. When budgets tighten, council members count heads and habits. A promenade lift near offices draws cameras and applause. A side street lift 2 stations east draws gratitude and quiet. Elections ride the first more than the second. Institutional inertia slows even good ideas. A crown raise touches 4 fiefdoms: port and harbour, river, finance, disaster management, each guarding process to prevent scandal and mistakes. Specs written when rainfall was different still govern bearings, coatings and seals. A change to hinge metallurgy takes a year. A cross-bureau street lift pilot needs 2 committees to say yes. Meanwhile, tides don't wait for minutes. Culture prizes order. Tokyo's identity is systems that work, lines that move, quiet competence. Adaptive staging reads prudent in that lexicon. Keep the belt steady, keep rituals intact, avoid drama. Managed retreat framed as community-led adaptation fits the preference for local initiative without confrontation. It also shifts cost off central ledgers and onto households, one flood board at a time. National politics adds gravity. Social security already consumes roughly a third of spending and climbs as Japan ages. Debt service shadows every plan. AMRO warns the household savings rate could turn negative by around 203, pushing the state toward costlier external funding. In that frame, every extra centimeter of crown must beat pensions on paper. Finance asks for avoided systemic loss per yen. Neighborhood lifts struggle to answer in that language. Turf splits the map. National ministries fund arterial rivers and ports. The metropolis funds local gates and streets. Who pays to lift a cul-de-sac that floods because a national gate must close? Each points to the other's mandate. Negotiations produce pilots and press releases, not policy that scales. Patchwork looks deliberate from afar, improvised up close. Time is the rudest constraint. Subsidence already happened, sea level is catching up. Reviews every 10 years feel sensible until 2 cycles equal a childhood spent stacking panels. Technology buys minutes, AI forecasts sensors, variable speed drives. Discipline buys reliability, spares on shelves, tests under load. Only money buys meters. Calm autumns dull urgency. Near misses validate delay. Complacency grows like mold behind drywall, unseen until it spreads. Micro story: a deputy mayor flips from a hospital funding session to a seawall briefing. One chart shows ICU shortages in 5 years. Another shows a levee segment 2 centimeters shy of the new surge line. He signs for the ICU. The levee gets sensors and a promise to revisit in the next plan. That's the triad: politics, culture, time, quietly deciding where water wins by inches. The choice revisited: what Japan is letting happen. Strip the language down and the choice is plain. Japan is holding the belts where the economy breathes and managing loss where the city sleeps. It isn't a scandal, it's a strategy written into budgets and maintenance logs. It keeps ports moving, subways dry at the junctions, hospitals and data halls on redundant power above design flood. It stabilizes a national balance sheet that's already burdened by pensions and debt service. Bond markets like certainty, investors like uptime. The belts deliver both. The logic is cold and consistent. A day of downtime in Otemachi and Shiodome costs more than a month of closures 2 stations east. A soaked logistics spine from Shinkiba through Ariake ripples into grocery shelves by morning. A pump failure near Tosu at the wrong hour clips power to a dialysis ward. So the belts get centimeters of crown, kits on shelves, looped feeders, and operators drilled to close gates by hand in rain. That's not favoritism, it's network math. But a ledger has 2 sides. On the other side are families in Koto, Sumida, and Edogawa who now live in assurance of functionality. They get inspections that don't miss, mobile pumps staged before storm weeks, shelter drills that hit 42 minutes from alert to cots out, and grants for flood boards, floor lifts, and mezzanines. They also get renewal letters with riders and deductibles that creep, mortgages that add quiet basis points, and appraisals that now note distance to upgraded barriers like minutes to station. They shoulder rituals because concrete landed elsewhere first. The benefits are real. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government's storm surge system, 15 floodgates, roughly 60 kilometers of seawall standing about 5 to 8 meters above low tide, inner levees, and 4 big drainage pump stations at Tatsumi, Sunamachi, Hamarikyu, and Shibora works. A single 2-3 meter pump can move about 12 tons of water a second. Dual command centers at Tatsumi and Konan watch tide gauges and close steel quickly, with redundancy if one center goes dark. Seawall heights are pegged to past typhoon memory and IPCC sea level guidance, reviewed on a 10-year cadence. The belts aren't slogans, they're hardware that holds. The costs are just as real, and they're human. A sweets shop that kept a street sweet through storms closes after a third premium hike and an uninsurable near miss. A daycare signs a bus contract for storm weeks and moves after a landlord balks at lifting panels. A widow keeps a lantern by the kettle and a radio on the sill because her clinic and neighbors live on that block, not uphill. A teenager learns which manholes rattle first and texts friends to meet on higher ground when the alert pings. Culture thins by invoice. Risk becomes a habit. Here's the part the language smooths. Adaptive staging, community-led adaptation, assurance of functionality. Those phrases are accurate, and they're also a way to keep maps even and markets calm. Internal tools add the phrase value retention, which means timing for concrete depends partly on whether premiums and prices hold in a neighborhood. If the market reads the pale shading and drifts, the case for height weakens. The loop is elegant and unforgiving. Is this deliberate sinking? Not in the physical sense. The worst subsidence happened from the 191s through the 197s, when groundwater pumping and natural gas extraction lowered eastern Tokyo by meters, up to about 4.4 meters in places, and created today's zero-meter zones. Regulations throttled pumping and the sinking slowed. But the policy choice now lets some places live with their low contours longer. Streets don't rise while floors do. Shops add panels while crowns elsewhere add centimeters. In that sense, parts of the city are being left closer to water by design. Why accept that? Because arithmetic bites. Social Security already takes roughly a third of public spending and is rising. Public debt remains very high. AMRO warns that household savings could turn negative around the early 203s, which would threaten Japan's ability to finance cheap, long bonds domestically. In that frame, every additional centimeter of wall must beat hospital beds and school roofs on a spreadsheet. Full defense, continuous crown raises, new pump capacity at every choke, looped power, elevated clusters of streets, requires more money and deeper political will than the current decade has offered. There are alternatives that were put on the table in this story. Lift contiguous clusters, curbs, thresholds, utility vaults, so insurance can price real elevation. Publish tiers with timelines so people can decide with eyes open. Pre-fund buyouts so families move together with dignity. Lock maintenance discipline into law, spares on shelves, tests under load, so the envelope does creep toward failure by stretched intervals. These aren't fantasies. They're choices that trade ribbon cuttings for receipts and ask ministries to share turf. For now, the city is choosing belts first, assurance in the bowls, and candor only in committees. It's not unique. Jakarta protects its newest crests and moves the capital. New Orleans harden the ring and prune the deepest bowls. Shanghai armors finance corridors while older lanes wait for redevelopment to lift them. Tokyo has an advantage they didn't. Discipline, reviews every 10 years, standards tied to IPCC guidance, dual control rooms, maintenance culture. Its risk is the same. Near misses normalize delay until a compound day presents a bill at ankle height. So what is Japan letting happen? A managed narrowing of the defended footprint, executed with technical skill and wrapped in careful words. It protects the national engine and asks some streets to carry acceptable damage so others don't. That's rational and it's rough. If that's the map, then fairness demands transparency and options. Publish the tiers and the queue. Fund pilots that lift streets, not just door sills. Offer buyouts that move friends, not strangers. Negotiate premium cuts tied to measured lifts. Otherwise, the belts will keep earning height, while the bowls keep practicing rituals, and the consent for this strategy will erode faster than any key. The decision isn't permanent. Money can widen the belt, law can harden maintenance, candor can lower panic while raising truth. The tide will keep asking the same question. It would help if the city answered it out loud. Tokyo's quiet bargain keeps the engine dry and leaves some streets to live with water by design. If you want the next map that flips that logic and what it actually costs, watch the follow-up now. Subscribe for more untold city choices and share this to put the real tiers on the table.